So, good morning. Are we all comfortable and seated? I would like to extend a warm welcome for everybody that had the courage as well as the interest to be here today, especially for Nathan and Kim, who will be leading the conversation today. As you've probably noticed, we had to make some last minute adjustments to the program. So it's a reformatted approach, and rather than a panel, which tends to be a bit more linear, we will probably want to seek the interaction with the audience a bit quicker. People that we are missing today are Jan Willem from Shell and Torsten, unfortunately, as well as Varun, who is actually with Wrangle and was supposed to moderate this event, which I'm now trying to do my best at as well. So bear with me. As I was saying, the format is a little bit different. So after my introduction, I will also ask Brian Tino, who sits there, to briefly introduce himself, and then we will go into the main program, which will be that Nathan as well as Kim will introduce themselves, and they talk a little bit about their organization, the purpose of their organization, and where they sit in the business at large. And then when we get to speak about design ops, I would probably want to seek your involvement, and feel free to share your opinions, your moods, as well as experiences. So I think together as a group, with a fairly senior and expert level group, we can raise the topic of design operations together. I'm Tom Bals. I'm Managing Director at Wrangle. Wrangle is an organization that started some 7 years ago in Toronto, when Nick van Weerdenburg, second generation Dutch immigrant in Toronto, jumped to the opportunity of front-end development using React, Angular, and Vue. Over the course of those 7 years, Nick has developed that organization to a 300 people shop, quite successful. And from front-end experience development, we believe that we've also earned a seat at the table, very popular term, a seat at the table in helping our clients with agile deployments as well as business transformation. Wrangle in Amsterdam is a fairly new kid on the block. We've been here for officially about half a year. We're 12 people in size. We are supporting 2 clients at the moment and growing rather successfully. As an organization, as a whole, we find it important to establish ourselves in the community by sparkling conversations and dialogue. And this is basically our first coming out in that sense, where together with our partner, we have combined our networks and have been able to have these 2 heavyweights at the table, as well as a fairly exclusive audience to discuss your mutual experience of or in design operations. And with that, Brian, I would like to invite you to introduce yourself, talk about Envision and how we work together.
Awesome. Goedemorgen. I am Brian Tino. I'm the head of our enterprise accounts team here in Europe. I've been with Envision for over 5 years now, which is like ancient in Envision's history. I've been here in Amsterdam for about the last year or so. And when I think back to Envision and just the landscape of design and design operations 5 years ago, thanks. Like these types of events and these types of conversations weren't happening. And so I'm really excited to be a part of this type of an event today, certainly to represent Envision and Wrangle. We formed this global partnership where Wrangle has so much expertise in development operations and design operations. Envision, we certainly have the platform, We share a lot of the best practices through designbetter.co, through the design leadership forums, but really unique opportunity to partner with Wrangle and really folks who are the practitioners of this type of education and this type of knowledge. So I think really cool opportunity to bring such a talented group of people together today, and excited to continue to reinforce and grow the community moving forward.
Awesome.
That's it.
Thank you. Yeah. So with that, Kim.
Oh.
Yeah. Ladies first, I would say.
Thank you.
So yeah, maybe you can speak to yourself, your role, and how you got there, the part of the organization that you represent. So I'll leave that to you.
Thank you. Hello everyone, I am Kim Marchant. I am the Design Ops Programme Manager at JP Morgan. I have been there for 7 weeks, so it's very early days, hence I'm still talking in weeks rather than months. Prior to that, I was the Design and Research Operations Lead at Sainsbury's Group. So for those of you who don't know what Sainsbury's is, it's a UK groceries retailer, but also owns Argos, which is a catalogue retailer, also Sainsbury's Bank as well. So I was there for 5 years, and I actually established and led the design and research operations team there, and then decided I needed a new challenge somewhere even larger at JP Morgan. The role at JP Morgan is a new one, as many design ops roles are, and that's what makes it super exciting, because you can really get into the business, understand the challenges, and then find the solutions that hopefully make the design team grow and grow. That's me.
Oh, yeah, so Nathan Wire. So I lead the design and operations teams at Philips. So Philips Experience Design, I think many people in the room certainly know Philips. And I think what's maybe less known about Philips for those that maybe don't live here or have not experienced Philips over their entire lifetime is it's a company that's going through massive transformation. It's no longer manufactures light bulbs or televisions. It licenses out its brand to those products, but it's essentially becoming a healthcare technology company. And the design organization is over 500 people across 8 different major design hubs. And my role is to help make sense of that from a design operations standpoint. Not claiming in this form that we have that all figured out yet, but we're definitely trying. My role is new. It's about 1.5 years old. And my background is more from the consulting side, so I think great to hear from this forum and make it a casual or open conversation to hear your questions. But my background is coming actually more from the consultancy side. I see some former colleagues here from Frog Design, where I was for 9 years, also from a digital agency called Huge, smaller agencies as well. Also have a corporate background in marketing, so a mix of design, but all through that stream, at least the last 15 years or so, has been working with creative people, and now learning how to essentially sort of scale up the power of design in a large organization, not as big as JP Morgan. Philips only has 80,000 employees, but also pretty familiar with working in smaller organizations and trying to find the efficiencies and quality of design in that role as well. So really looking forward actually to the discussion today and hope that it is a discussion.
Yeah, awesome, thank you. So if we look at the guests yourself of today, I think a lot of the organizations have in common that they are quite sizable and that they share a fairly high level of complexity. Yet we see in those organizations that design have organized themselves differently, and also take a different role in supporting and or leading the organization. And I'm just curious to understand how things are organized at JP Morgan in that sense. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and we were touching on this earlier actually. So, obviously, it's an absolutely massive organisation, and
How many people?
260,000, don't quote me on that, but it's big, yeah. And
Anybody that can beat that in the audience, or no?
So absolutely.
That's just the division that you're in, or
No, that's
a whole. That's not designers.
That's
is
just
it?
our designers.
Okay.
Yeah. That's just the design ops
wish
team.
that somehow. No.
But it's a fair point actually, because a massive organisation split into different lines of business. My role and our design team, called the Digital Experience Design Team, are focused within the corporate and investment bank. So it's one area, and that's important because you've got to start somewhere. And there are actually different teams in the other lines of business, but I can't speak to those because again we're focused in this one particular area, which is still incredibly large and across multiple sites across the world. And our design org consists of service designers, user experience designers, user interface or visual designers, researchers. We have also a really large toolkit team as well, which is fundamental to, well, we can talk more about that, but it's fundamental to how we operate as well. So that is JP Morgan. Sainsbury's, I want to bring that up as well, because it was slightly different in the sense that we supported the whole company. And with a team of only 50 to 70 designers, you can imagine how that massive ecosystem. But then interestingly, that enabled us to actually pick and choose where we could really add the most value. And that's something that we can also come on to in terms of where do you start with design and where do you start with design ops, which I think is a really interesting conversation.
Yeah. Did you also observe differences in importance that was put on design by the business between your recent experiences, Sainsbury and now with JP Morgan?
Yeah, absolutely. I think over the years I've noticed that it's now becoming a much bigger conversation around how to, and it's more widely understood in terms of the importance of design. But I think about a few years ago, that conversation was a lot harder, and we had to keep trying to prove ourselves and keep trying to bring up and bring into the room, here's what we did for this product, and look how well it did. I think particularly now, depending on obviously who you report into. So at JP Morgan, we have a managing director of user experience design who reports directly into a business head of business. So you used the phrase seat at the table, right? So we have a seat at the table, and actually because we have someone that really gets design at a very senior level in the business, then that enables us to do more. I think it's fair to say without that person, I think the challenge is harder.
Yeah. So Philips has a similar model. So it's a centralized organization. I think we've all, or some of us have all read the Peter Merholtz book, Design Orgs, Org Design for Design Orgs. Yeah. At least I heard you referring to it. So yeah, the centralized partnership model where you have a centralized design org reporting up into one person. So in the case of Philips, it does have a chief design officer. And it sounds similar, I think, that you have a centralized team. Philips is that organized in that way as well. Our chief design officer, who I report to, is reporting up into the chief innovation officer. So one step below the CEO, that does help. I think in some design organizations, the chief design person or head of design can report into software development or even marketing. I think we see those models working in different organizations that I've been a part of. I think what works for Philips is that Sean Carney, the chief design officer, is advocating for design. So I would say he's almost like chief design advocate. So he spends most of his time in the various management discussions, even in the executive committee, just advocating for user experience, advocating for design thinking. So in that sense, like you said, compared to even 10 years ago, I think design thinking at Philips, we call it co-create, has landed. I think there's still a long way to go because of the complexity, at least of Philips. In one organization alone, there's 280 some odd applications. Trying to get that down into every single nook and cranny of every single space of those teams is a much more difficult task, as you can imagine, and having it land. But in terms of just the way the team is organized, it rolls up into that centralized organization, and the design teams are then embedded in each of the product functions that they're supporting. And so in that way, it's very much a federated, kind of spread out design team. that does do timesheets. So we are a bit of a hybrid kind of agency model, although that can cause pros and cons. It does account for being able to see the impact and measure the impact of design if you know what's being invested from design in a particular development of a product. And the downside of that is that your team does spread itself out, and it's really hard to manage the consistency, which is, I think, why we're here, to talk about how do you keep consistent quality, consistent deliverables when your team is spread out all over the globe across hundreds of different products, to be able to drive some sort of uniform quality even, or what is design in that large of an organization.
Yeah. So, I mean, you already are touching on some of the challenges, I guess, to either scale your organization or to run a design organization at scale. And I think we get to speak to that quite a bit more when we talk about the role and the functions of design operations. Yet being part of the business, you're also being looked at to deliver and perform. How do you align your return on investment or your performance measurement against that of the business at large? What are you being looked at to deliver, Nathan?
Yeah, I mean, it's a constant conversation. I mean, I'm sure we're all in this room loaded full of key performance measures, so KPIs, those kind of things that come from the business. Philips, at its core, is an invention company going back 130 years. Engineering, invented the cassette, invented the DVD, is inventing medical technologies, and likes to measure a lot of things. And so that does trickle down into the design organization, not even trickle, it hits the design organization. And that's a great thing if it has a purpose. So we're always trying to balance sort of the business KPIs that come into the design organization with actually how do you measure design quality. And we're always looking at really the other side of it, which is what's the engagement, the happiness of the design organization as it's spreading itself all over the company. And on that one, honestly, we don't do such a great job. It's a huge KPI that I have in my role is to, and this gets to design ops, but how to just make better, happier, more productive. I think there's a Radiohead song about that. Designers, like just make designers want to come to work every day and do the best work of their life. Like that is actually my number one KPI. We have a quarterly survey. Maybe some of you in large organizations kind of have these quarterly or annual employee surveys. That's one of the biggest KPIs we have in our design organization right now. It's just how do you improve engagement in our design organization on top of all of those business KPIs, dashboards of red, yellow, green that are all over the place. That's super important, but equally important for our organization is how designers are doing in their roles and in their career and how they're advancing and are they meeting their goals. Because we don't want them to leave if they're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're measuring ENPS in that sense, or is
yeah, basically, yeah. There's a scale that we look at along engagement, agility. Are we helping make decisions fast enough to move them along in whatever blocker it is, tools, getting the software they need loaded on their laptops, even those kind of very minutiae things that are super frustrating. And inside of a design organization, there's a constant designers are different. Challenges when working with cross-functional teams like IT, HR. So having a more nuanced conversation other than just saying designers are different, because that doesn't really work, as many of you understand. You have to have a more nuanced or longer conversation than just saying that. You have to validate that. So yes.
Okay.
That's important.
You've done it. You've said it all.
Sorry.
I love it. No, that's great.
Sorry.
This is great because I'm nodding along saying this is exactly, it's great to hear, and I don't know if anyone else feels the same. A lot of the things that you've just spoken about there are absolutely what we're doing at JP Morgan and also Sainsbury's. And I think it's really interesting I know you mentioned the word timesheets earlier. Just going to very quickly
How many organizations do timesheets, by the way? I always ask this because I'm so curious. Does anyone have to do them for in-house design teams, as opposed to?
No.
Nobody.
Okay.
We are stepping into it.
You have to what?
We are stepping into
Stepping
it.
into it,
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Designers are assigned to product teams.
Okay.
And recently we start measuring that with some our declaration, tempo declaring.
Okay.
But as a former Philips employee myself,
Okay.
I had some struggles with the way we declare because we end up putting some hours under the carpet, because you end up putting something that's not exactly what you're working on, but you are assigned to that project, so then you declare into those hours.
That's a really good point.
And that is something where I'm still struggling in how to frame that better for the organization.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's, for the organization, it's good when it comes to return on investment for the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think where it goes towards investment, it's great. Where it goes towards becoming a punitive measure, it's not good.
No.
And when it drives down designers' engagement, but that's coming from our agency backgrounds, we all cringe at timesheets, but it's necessary. But I'm talking. Sorry.
No, I'm just going to agree with you there again. I think that the reason I bring timesheets up is because when you're trying to deliver impact at scale, you need to be able to track it, right? So even before getting into the conversation of where design ops can help, which it can, we have to be tracking what we're doing. So everything you said about measurement is absolutely spot on. And then I would also add to that, tracking. And this is again from experience, how many projects are we doing? How many stakeholders are we connecting with? How many user research studies are we doing? How many customers are we connecting with? If you can somehow track this activity, you can put a quantitative data point on that and see it improve. And then that would for us, links directly up to how a business metric, which is customer centricity, for example. So again, coming back to, scale is actually your friend here, right? Because I've got so much data to work with because I've got a large number of designers, a large number of projects, a large number of stakeholders, and that is absolutely key. And then you can go back and say, hey, so this year we have done X number of projects. Obviously, then you've got to dive into the metrics of those individual ones because obviously you've got to then showcase that this was a success. Actually, so then obviously you dive into the individual product metrics, for example, but you pull out the ones that are success. Why were they a success? How did they operate? How was that Scrum team set up?
Do you do any sort of post-project critique or post-mortem with your stakeholders and say, how did the project go?
Yeah, that's super important. And that comes back to another metric, which is feedback, positive feedback, whether it's from your stakeholders, your business partners, or, again, as you said, your team. It's, for me, I just love it because it's all just rich data that you can use and you can put in a quarterly report and watch yourself evolve and grow and hopefully take on more projects, but hopefully bring in more designers to do that work as well.
So the question really was about how you measure ROI and align with business performance. But I also heard a lot of talk about employee satisfaction and how to keep employees engaged. And I'm diverting a little bit from the main topic, but there's definitely a war for talent going on as well, since most of the companies here are from large organizations. Who do you see as your competition for that talent, and how can you counter that, perhaps also using a part of, let's say, a design operations system?
Good question.
You want to go for it?
Yeah, I mean, all the other banks, of course.
All the other banks. There are a few banks here in the audience. Who are the banks in the audience? So, yeah.
Hi. Well, I say that because, of course, designers are, as we know, banking, right, the really complicated systems, and your designers, we spoke about this again last night, but, more than likely they've got experience in a bit more of an analytical approach, and they've got experience of those complicated systems. And once it's such a steep learning curve in banking, which I'm on week 7 of, that you're more than likely going to then keep moving around the banks, right? Because you've already got to that point where you've learned a lot. So we absolutely need to make sure that, and this, design ops can absolutely help as well, making sure that we are really focusing on development, progression, make sure people understand how they can progress, particularly in banking as well. It's tough. You've got to really, tick a lot of boxes. So that's super important. It comes back to what you were saying about, understanding how people are feeling, whether it's from, regular catch-ups with your line manager, but also in my experience, design ops has played a massive part in that. And I would actually be very honest and say that in my very early days in design ops at Sainsbury's, I became a therapist. No, but it was, how are you? Are you okay?
Yeah.
How is your day? How's your project going? And it's a different conversation because you're not their line manager.
Yeah.
So it can take a different, and then you can get into that world of coach. I mean, I'm kind of digressing a bit.
Shoulder to cry on.
Well, and
I say that
coaching.
quite often in my role. That, and it's often for the design directors in our organization. They're basically the people managers and responsible for capability or competence development. So whether it's design research, industrial design, strategy, design strategy. My role is to provide them a platform to explore capability, where their team is going, how they develop their team, the investments they need to make. Because I think, at least I see it in Philips, but I also hear it from having these kind of discussions, that there's just so much business pressure that can easily get lost in the conversation because of the pressure to utilize your team on projects. The conversation around capability, developing staff, it's easy to get lost. And so there needs to be that healthy balance. McKinsey actually came up with this model called the Helix model, like against the idea or evolving the model of the matrix model, saying basically in any organization, especially a design organization, it needs to be balanced between value delivery and capability delivery, or capability development rather, and those should be separate but equal parts. And we definitely see it sometimes in our organization that it gets way skewed towards value creation or value delivery, which is delivering your work to the business. But that sometimes can feel at the expense of burning out your team and not focusing on how are you doing as a service designer? Or you're a UX designer that wants to really invest in service design and grow that capability. Where's the time to do that when you're working 40 hours a week per your timesheet on this project in the business? So it's carving out the time to be able to do that.
And also I found in my experience working with designers that actually some people can find it hard to think about, well, where do I want to be? Where do I want to be in 3 years? I don't really know. Why am I doing this design work? I don't understand how it connects to the business objectives.
Yeah.
And there's all those kind of conversations that, again, like you said, you can be completely tunnel visioned on just being, especially if you're working in Scrum, right? And you're just working in your sprints, just focusing on what you've got to do next. It's our responsibility as design leaders to, like you said, make sure that we are making time for our teams to say it's okay to stop and think about this. And we at Sainsbury's made it very clear to our team that you can take some time out each month and focus on your development. And
interesting.
Yeah.
How did you carve that out? Is it mandatory?
Absolutely not mandatory.
But how did you carve out that time for people?
Well, I think someone mentioned over there slipping it under the carpet. No, I'm kidding. No, we didn't do that. But no, so that was, Sainsbury's is a really good company for that in terms of investing in people, right? So it was, just coming back to the timesheet thing, there was a line in the timesheet that says development time.
Okay.
Everyone across the board can book 1 or 2 days a month, and that is built into our investment finance plan. So, yeah.
Let me give you the mic.
Yeah, sure.
Please do.
Yeah, we can't hear it.
Alan and myself, we work in the same organization. We're both representing with what you guys are talking about in terms of keeping the happiness of the design team. But one thing that is challenging for us is you have design activities, and our organization is close to the numbers you guys voiced. How we keep, for instance, design work that is done for the health of the design team.
Yeah.
For instance, defining a clear set of who we are serving as customers.
Yeah.
If I have journey teams that we have inside of our organization, that work will benefit all the journey teams. It's end-to-end experience method.
Yeah.
But then none of the journey teams want that hour assigned to their team because it's bigger than their problem.
I think everyone would recognize that problem.
And that's the under the carpet problem. How do I declare those hours? Because if I go to the financial guys, what you're doing here? Oh, I'm defining profiles to work. It's not assigned to the journey, so you shouldn't do it. So
that's interesting. I thought that was more like agency or consultancy problem, which is more the side where I'm from. where you deliver design as a service, but you kind of forget to organize yourself as a design organization. And I had expected that larger corporations would have a better chance or a better opportunity to intentionally think about how they would organize the work, but that's still a challenge, you're saying.
The concept of design as a service is something that we have been trying to build inside of our organization, because we are serving different, on our federated organization, several countries asking us specific things. But we are originally assigned to work with the journey teams we have in-house.
Yeah.
So that balance is still not there, and often, no, do under the radar. So I'm not doing that under the radar. I'm actually assigning hours to it, and I want to move on with assigning hours. But it is still, we are in the midst of solving that, but not solving it yet.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you want to answer that?
Well, I have experience of that, because we struggle with that at Sainsbury's a lot, especially at the beginning, right? When people, in fact, it's important to say, at the beginning of our journey at Sainsbury's, the role of our design team was just to get designers in to do work. It was very executional, right? Assign a designer over there, oh, okay, because actually we needed to just get across and just get people to see what design was doing. As we evolved in our maturity, as you said, it was important for us to go, hang on, why are we even doing that? That is the same thing that we're doing over here. Mm-hmm. Let's actually look at the overall journey. You're absolutely right, we hit a blocker because there's no time and no budget for that. This is where it helps to have someone at a very senior level who gets design, and sometimes that in itself is a challenge, but we got to a point where we were started to write our business case for that work, and how we would measure it, how it will benefit the business. Can we in some way relate that to hard ROI in terms of, this, if we look at this bigger picture in terms of the service design piece, actually that will affect all of these products down here and save you time. It was a really big process, but actually through that very long process of explaining the benefits and then picking out very small experiments to kind of within the particular teams that maybe were, oh, that sounds interesting, go on, let's trial that. And then showing the benefits of that experiment helped us to actually get support to do it on a bigger scale. Yeah. So again, kind of ending up doing strategy and execution, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just follow on to say for Philips, what I've seen, but also some research we did with other companies that have similar sized teams validates this. It very much has to be a structural solution. So the under the carpet thing works for a while, but when it comes down to investment, it's basically your design team's time, and that has to be allocated for whether you use timesheets or not. It's one way to do it. But you're basically asking for, usually it's about an 80-20 ratio. And of course, what ends up happening is you still need some free time, right? So that's where it becomes very structural. So much like your development time, we ended up calling ours collaboration time, just so it wouldn't sound like free time. But we launched it this year, and so there's basically free time. It's kind of like the Google 20% idea that's been around for 10 years, and some say that was a failure, some say it was a success, but ultimately you have to build in these kind of structural things into the way design's time is invested as you begin to scale. And other companies that we've done benchmarking with, like Capital One in the US, another financial services firm, similar to Philips, they basically have like an 80-20 financial allocation at the top level, and that has to be bought off by very senior management. Yes. So 80% of your budget, for us is an annual operating plan, AOP, 80% of the budget goes to the core product projects, and 20% is for central investment in the design team. And that 20% investment, it's not that it's pet projects that we can just do whatever we want. It still has to have impact, and we have to do business cases and prove that it filters back down into the business somehow. But it's more or less at our discretion to steer those investments and understand how it can benefit the development of craft. That's how we develop new practices. So our data-enabled design practice came out of that. Our service design practice came out of that. A huge focus on design research and hospitals came out of that. So that's kind of how we are doing it.
Nathan, can I understand?
Yeah.
Sorry, from regular overhead?
Regular overhead. Now we're getting
Yes,
into
it's
balance
like
sheets.
hardware, etc. And
Repeating his question so we can.
no, but how is it different from regular overhead? Because like you could say like 10% of the time is needed to develop the organization.
Yeah.
And just like the other costs, is just costs you amortize over all the project hours as a kind of factor.
I love this conversation, yes. So.
No,
I don't want
just
to go too geeky, but I think you need both, basically. I think you need sort of regular time built in. So if I just look at it from a very empathetic way, look at the designer and how they spend their week, I think you need both time built into your typical designer's week, so they have quote-unquote free time to invest in pet projects. And then you also need on top of that, in an ideal world, structural time, which is the 80-20 thing, that says the design organization needs time to invest in projects which
and
benefit,
itself,
and itself, and in projects which benefit, the all boats rise kind of strategy.
Which are more controlled and visible.
Yeah, but you need both.
Yeah.
And what we found at Philips was we were doing the 80-20 thing. We were doing all these strategy projects. Maybe you saw this as well. We were doing all these 20% strategy projects, but sometimes they steer towards me maybe being a bit too academic, looking at the future of design. We weren't giving the individual designers time. And they were telling us in their engagement surveys, hey, I'm burned out, I'm going on burnout, or I'm working, my 40-hour work week is like the standard, it's usually 50, and that doesn't work either. So that was what we are trying to now change and modify.
Yeah.
So.
But that's a good question as well, because you've got your just general operational running costs and activities. But like you say, when you called them pet projects,
Yeah.
and this is where design ops can help, because we would
More structure than
yeah,
that.
we would try
of
and they started off as pet projects,
Right.
but then we would say actually this is now a legitimate project that's going to benefit along the line. So then actually we would have, I guess we would call them DX, digital experience team, DX projects. So we've got business projects, we've got DX projects, but then you might have on the side, obviously you've got people's time for development, but we would make sure those projects are, so in the most, again, this is too much detail, but we would set them up in our timesheet system as a project. People would book to them, but they would have a different budget.
Yeah, and I like what I'm also hearing in addition or maybe in contradiction to the under the carpet and the pet project approach, that in some instances or a lot of instances you're approaching the business on their own terms by producing business cases.
Correct.
And demonstrating the value of that overhead time and what the outcomes might have been.
And that's the key to building a successful design team, is actually following it at scale, understanding the business and how it operates, and following those processes
But
in the same way.
The important lesson is that you can do this with 5 designers or 500, because design is maturing all around us, as we know. And if designers are spending their time on something, it should be measured ultimately so that the value can be proven to stakeholders. And that doesn't matter whether it's 5 or 500.
Please, go ahead.
Yeah, I got a question. Perhaps you could elaborate a bit on how your organization is structured in terms of facilitating teams.
Yeah.
So to get a bit of a picture, I heard you mention a toolkit team. So can you tell a bit more about that?
Yeah, sorry. So we have a big toolkit team, and that is absolutely all about enabling the wider design team, but also the engineering community. And I would say, I'm going to just throw this out here, that every design team needs to have a toolkit team, because you're operationalizing your craft in terms of, if we can make the way that we do things more efficient, therefore we're ultimately going to be more efficient for the business. So there's that piece in terms of how important it is. But yes, also you mentioned facilitating and kind of, so a big part of, and this was, I'm still learning JP Morgan, but at Sainsbury's, that toolkit team, fundamental to that working was the outreach and getting out there and talking to product teams, scrum teams, developers, other designers, and becoming facilitators, right? Sitting next to designers to say, hey, how is that working out? Would it be easier if you did it like this? But it also being a two-way dialogue. And so that happened in an informal way, but also in a more structured way. So we'd have workshop sessions where we can co-create and collaboratively come up with suggestions that because obviously the other challenge is that when you have a toolkit team, you're not in product working on products that are being released, right? So there's risk of you guys being tunnel vision.
Totally.
So you've got to make sure that you're learning from the people on the ground. So there's got to be a two-way thing there. But again, for me as well, design teams, the more you evolve, the more we are becoming facilitators. I mean, a lot of, again, at Sainsbury's, more examples are there from there because was there for a long time, but a lot of our designers were, we were working in terms of upskilling them in terms of their facilitation techniques, and a lot of designers were doing more workshops than actual hands-on design because we were trying to encourage other people.
Let's pause there for a second, and I'm pretty sure we'll get to your questions as well, because we talked about how design relates to business performance. We talked about designer or employee engagement and satisfaction, and now we are touching on how toolkits can foster collaboration and facilitation. I would like to pause here for a little bit and maybe lift the subject somewhat to design ops, that big beast, the myth. How would you define design ops?
I thought that's what we're talking about.
We definitely are. And everything will fall in place again. So, but maybe, what would be your definition?
I think I'm going to like your definition better. Are you going to go first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definition of design ops.
Yeah.
Okay. The team that enables and leads on non-design and operational and organisational tasks to elevate the effectiveness of a design team.
Wow. So it's an organization. No, that's cool.
Oh, thanks, guys. Okay, your turn.
So it's a function, right? You describe it as a function.
Absolutely, a specialism as well, because you have, we say, domain expertise in project management or program management, and design. You know design and you know designers.
Okay.
Yeah, it's basically operations people that understand creative.
Okay.
They understand
That's
the creative
a simpler
mindset.
way of saying it.
So literally at Philips, and I'm not joking, I've been saying the last year, like, design ops, it's a thing, Google it, and then we'll have a chat. Only because obviously it's been around a long time, it just hasn't been called design ops. And I think it's the function of centralizing a lot of activities, as I said earlier, to make better, fitter, happier, healthier, more productive designers. And I think previously a lot of those activities were pretty scattered in organizations. It would be one heroic program manager that we all know from an agency we worked in or an organization we've worked in that was really good at making a team happy and efficient on a particular project, but they were scattered on the edge of the universe and just doing a great thing with that team. And so it's just bringing those functions together so that designers have more time to do great work. So that can be processes, that can be tools, it can be culture. It can be just embedding cultural memes, elements into a team that just make it function better. And so it's pretty loose, I think, in the set of things, and I think it's the role of design ops as a function, coming together to define measurements around it and make it more of a thing, so that designers just have more time, basically, especially in in-house teams. I think in agencies, design ops is a bit, I think, less of a thing, although it's there. But I think especially in medium and larger growing in-house teams, there's just a lot of demands. And so I think that's the definition, is to reduce those demands on a designer and give them space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in addition to happier designers, what does that bring to business then?
So, in addition to, because obviously happy designers is one of the most important things, but where to start? I think the piece around design ops is that, and I mentioned the word tracking earlier on, and I just think this design ops is a central team. We have a bird's eye view of, ideally, everything that's going on within the design org, and that's particularly important when you've got designers embedded across, federated across lots of different projects. So who else has a central view, and who else has the time to take that central view and do something useful with it? So, and that's where design ops can play that part. And then that kind of holistic kind of view and organisational approach can then be used in any way that you want to use it in line with your goals and objectives, right? So for example, I know that our business needs to improve our customer centricity and our connection with customers and users, right? So then I will use my design ops role to, embed a new tool to make sure that it's easy for our designers to access users. I might start to work with an agency to build a panel of users and customers that we will kind of administer and look after, and we might embed some processes around just best practice in research in terms of always doing your kind of consent forms, things like that. So there's process elements, but it means that you're increasing your connection to customers, but you're also doing it in the right way as well.
Okay.
I can go on. There's lots of different areas.
Yeah.
I think so. In addition to all those, like some of it's like a whole area of research ops.
That's just research.
So
exactly.
research ops we definitely do, and are always formalizing it, because again for us it's been scattered. I mean, we've had research ops for years, just haven't called it that. We've actually focused quite a lot on career pathing. Yeah. And I hate the word standardization, so I would just call it consistency. When you have a very scattered design organization, showing up the same way, whether it's in a meeting or on a Skype call or Teams or whatever we're using, is important. And also for a designer's career to know how they fit in. So we focused on seemingly simple things in the beginning when I showed up on just like design titles. We had 500 designers and like 350 titles, different types of titles. Awesome. So we got that down to 15. And then also introducing new sort of career paths and swim lanes. So people had sort of a North Star on where to map their career in an organization where you have designers that are fresh out of university and designers that have been there 25 years. There wasn't a clear path that I hope everyone can recognize between sort of someone that's being more of a creative lead and someone that's more on that principal or expert career track. So we really focused on that separation that just wasn't there. And in a big organization, you have to collaborate with HR and make sure all of those things really check out. So that was another focus for us. And to me, again, it's that overview. No one has that overview of the whole organization and can bring that in. And then govern it and make sure that there's space for everyone. So,
right as well, so working with other areas of the business, HR, procurement, finance, that takes time.
How about engineering? How can design ops help that connection or that handoff?
So that's another thing as well. Do you want
You go first.
So again, having that holistic view, you've got an understanding of where your designers are in the business, who they're working with, where are they working, what teams are they working at, how many engineers are in that team. But then what's really important is you've got to be on the ground talking to those teams and understanding how they're operating, how are they working, where are the challenges, where are the blockers, and then you're often kind of using those teams to kind of explore how you can support and help. And this is where it's an interesting thing, because at Sainsbury's, each of those teams had Scrum Masters, they had Agile coaches, right? So that's where you've got to really explore, how does design ops help when you've already got a Scrum Master? So you're not involved in the day-to-day, you're more of an elevated position around ways of working, and then it comes back to standardization a bit, because every team does work differently, but you've got to make sure that your designer's approaching things in a structured way. Okay,
so you talk about standardization, right? I'm going to ask a little bit of a cheeky leading question. Like, how can some of the tooling then help you protect the design intentions and integrity as you expose it to other parts of the organization?
And what's the risk therein of, or what do you mean?
No, it's more...
Is that the leading part? I'm trying to figure out.
Okay, so maybe it wasn't so leading and more mysterious. No, in fact, I'm referring to design systems and how. So
Yeah, I mean, the toolkit, and we were joking. Well, you have a name for your design system. No, at Sainsbury's you did.
Sainsbury's, Lou.
Yeah, Philips doesn't have a name either. Maybe we were hoping to have a poll to name some design systems. Philips is called the DLS, Digital DLS Design Language System. So it's not sexy. It definitely needs a name. But yeah, it's very much a federated model because there's so many different application platforms, some teams working in Agile, some not. Legacy systems everywhere, especially in the healthcare environments. I'm mainly speaking about healthcare, 280 applications in one business vertical alone in various stages of maturity. So we are using the design system, like you said, as a communication vehicle to reach out and engage with those business teams and be able to communicate standards so that things like what we've all, hopefully not all, but been in a hospital and interacted with a nurse that's clicking away on a keyboard. A lot of those are Philips systems, they're electronic medical record systems. Philips makes those and many other. Patient interfaces, hospital clinician interfaces, digital imaging interfaces, and striving for consistency in that environment when all the platforms are different. It's basically a lot of kind of heavy enterprise software, similar to banking.
Okay.
It's, how do you create all consistency in that environment? And it can be, let's just say, routine work for designers. And our hope is, of course, that the design system can reduce some of the mundane aspects of that work and, again, strive for creativity in other areas so that someone's not creating the same button over and over again or the same drop-down menu over and over again, the same patient list picker 100 different times. And we're moving on to what we call modules, which is basically a longer flow between applications or screens, and trying to standardize those across different clinical environments, and trying to house those in different platforms like Envision. That's the journey we're on. Did that answer your question?
I thought that was pretty cool, and I'm not sure if you agree, but I heard you say two things, right? It helps you to better manage the output and the consistency of the output. What I also liked is that perhaps the implementation and the maintenance of a design system serves as a platform for communication with the other departments, right?
Yeah, you were saying that earlier, yeah.
Yeah, it's a tool to, you mentioned about engineers, right? It's a tool to bring design and engineers together, and that's been really important for us to land. I say us, I'm in Sainsbury's actually, because I was on that journey.
It's okay.
I know, because I'm at JP Morgan now. Right. But I use that as an example because I was on that journey with the design system in terms of, and it was absolutely key to position it not as a tool for designers, but a tool for product design and engineering, right? Yep. So bringing those two communities, and then what we ended up creating was, you've got communities of practice, right? You've got design community of practice, you might have an engineering community of practice.
Right.
We had a design system community of practice, so that and engineers and designers can join, and it just brought those two roles together. And I'm going to go one step further actually and say that we introduced a way of working which was pairing. So designers and developers were actually sitting together, working on the same feature or on the same computer, and actually really starting to bridge the gap. And then that takes us into a whole conversation about T-shaped design and skill set. But I feel like
that's an interesting one.
Yeah, the toolkit brings those two roles together because they cannot work in isolation, right?
Yeah, a big challenge we have to that end is the role of what is a front end developer? Is it a UX developer? Is it a front-end developer that sits in engineering? I mean, Philips struggles with that one. I don't know if any heads nodding on that topic. But at least in an engineering-driven organization where you have traditional developers, they tend to be trained more in back-end development. And then in our design organization, at least at Philips, we've not hired traditionally sort of design technologists or front-end experienced developers, so there's still a bit of a gap in that handoff. And we're actively figuring out how to develop that design competence. Of course, there's the hybrid designer that comes out of university now, has 5 years of experience that can develop. But just creating the mental space or the process space in a large organization for who does what is something that we're actively working through.
I saw your hand. Not sure if you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I have a question. To Kim's point about how important it is to even define who the audience, the primary audience of your design system should be. I just wanted to kind of elaborate a bit on that and hear your thoughts on, we see with many companies that the most successful companies introducing design systems really treat it as a product internally, which encompasses everything from user research, context of use, user satisfaction, and all of this. And I think it's probably human nature to take shortcuts when it comes to work we do for ourselves rather than for the customers of our business. So how can you ensure that you keep that vision up to apply those best practices to an internal product like a design system as much as you would do to an external product?
I absolutely agree that your design system is a product, and we have a product team, and I speak both there for Sainsbury's and JP Morgan. It's a product team. That team has an investment that sits alongside other products in the business. So it has the same requirements in terms of managing, in terms of looking at risk and progress and outcomes and measures. It absolutely should be treated the same, because it's fundamental, and actually takes you right back to, when we started thinking about a design system, it was actually a pet project.
Right. Yeah. And it's the same for us. So back to the 80-20, Philips allocates some of that, a large part of that 20% towards its design system. Mm-hmm. So it was hard in the beginning to pass the hat around, or sweep under the rug, whichever the metaphor is, to ask, hey, build this design system, make it a product. And so now it's a part of our centralized investment. But now as it becomes more federated and is the communication tool, the business sees the value. Also because we have executive sponsorship, they have it in their KPIs. It's now a business KPI to have design system adoption by business or by product line. What percentage of the product is compliant with the design system, so that helps. So yes, I think treating it as a product is critical in that regards.
I'll give you the mic. So.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm curious how you can, because it started as a pet project, the design system.
Yeah.
How can you prove that it's valuable for business to spend more time on the design system as a product? Because I think we all believe here that a design system in an organization should be treated as a product, but most businesses don't see the same value as we do. How can you convince business that they should hire a dedicated team on this design system, and that it is a product inside of a business?
Sure, I can start. I mean, I think, you're not going to come in large, right, and say, okay, here's €1 million or a 5-person team or whatever. You have to start with small pilots and proof of concepts, prototypes to prove the value, that's for sure. One that comes to mind that was basically, Philips has been around a long time, so there's been versions of the design system for years, but the recent iteration, the last 5 years, is really came on strong. We basically piloted it with our electronic medical records business, EMR, that funny enough was an acquisition in Brazil. And that is basically, the software that runs hospital records. That was a pilot there. So it was really a very small team of 5 designers, actually 2 in the beginning, that tackled showing the value of being able to have a consistent language for the literally thousands of screens in that application by tackling a few key components. I don't know which ones, probably just buttons and drop downs, like I said, patient picker lists, because the development organization there needed to see the value. So that it's a development engineering organization that saw that doing that would clearly reduce development times in the long run, but more importantly, the patient and staff experience in a hospital could see the value. So I think there's no silver bullet, unfortunately, but I do think it's leaning in and picking a very small pilot where you can prove the value, even in one flow or one component or some element of the application where it's clearly that there can be long-term efficiencies.
And you could compare that with a team that maybe isn't using the design system in terms of piloting. You know, you could even run, I don't know if anyone does hackathons here, but like we've done 24-hour hackathons where maybe one team is tasked with using the design system and another team isn't, and then you see what can be developed in 24 hours. And yes, you're absolutely right, you need to build in the hard benefits, right? Because we started off saying, well, you know, it will really improve the consistency and the brand perception. Yeah, okay, marketing get that, but the finance team didn't get that. So we built in the hard measures, or hard benefits, which were, again, obviously, it's a hypothesis at the beginning, right, when you're starting to build it out, but you ask people and you say, hey, can you try this and tell me how much time you think it would save you? And we use that theoretical data to build a figure around how much time saved in productivity. And then, using that hypothesis, we would take that into our business case, and then always lean back on that when we're going back to review it and say how are we measuring against that original theory.
Fantastic.
Can I have a follow-up question on this? Right now, and especially in this room, we all pretty much represent companies where design is more mature and design systems are not being the news. And what do you think about the dark side of it? So basically, you just mentioned, starting with like, there is a notion that it limits creativity.
We talked
Let's
about
go
that
there.
a little bit.
Let's go there. Let's do this thing.
Great question. Yeah.
Is that your question, or do you have more?
Okay. Please go.
Go there.
Yeah.
Go there.
Yeah.
Happy designers, but no creative space.
Yeah,
You
I think
just talked about the performance and that it, of course, like improves performance and people can deliver more and so on. Like, but for what cost?
You go there first.
Okay, if we turn that round and say, turn the dark side into the light side, which is that if you can help to make their designers' lives easier and deliver more efficiently, more quickly, in theory, think of all the time they've got to be more creative.
Yeah.
And that's the point. Like, what if you know, not all designers want to, as you said, you know, focus on the more executional side of buttons. And so you can, automate is completely the wrong word, but you know, if you can simplify that, the sell is that there's more time to be more creative.
Yeah, I think if you're selling it to a design team as please show up to work, go into Sketch and drop these components on a page and then go home, thank you very much. Your attrition rate will be 50% of your organization will be leaving within a year. And in fact, that's what we had in Bangalore. So the Bangalore design team at Philips is 30 growing on 50. Typically, if any of you work with offshore teams, they get a very bad rap, right? Which is we will send our production work over there somewhere, and it will come back with a bunch of screens done. And we're taking a different approach, which is no, we want to actually hire talent there, senior talent all the way down to whatever, fresh college graduates, and we want them to be highly engaged. But everyone there is mainly digital talent, UX designers, developers, and they will be working in the design system. So the approach there was create we call it an innovation program, probably a horrible word that means nothing, but basically giving innovation projects in the studio where they each can take up a program that goes completely outside of the design system, access to care in rural India, doing design research projects. So that's what we use our extra time for that we've embedded. So it's just doing something else with that time and creating a loop so that they can feed back like improvements to the design system so they have a voice in improving either the way we're communicating with the design system, being experts in the design system. It doesn't fix all the problems, but you have to attack it head on, I guess, would be the sentiment there, at least from my perspective.
And it absolutely encourages progression and development, right? So in theory, that less time spent on the day-to-day executional stuff so that you can, and perhaps as well, you might come in as a designer, let's just say, for example, a bit more junior, less experienced, and you might go and work on things that are a bit more executional, and then you're given more time to start to grow your skills, and that's where you kind of start to see.
Yeah.
If you can enable that within your organisation, you're going to keep people, hopefully.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Are you not buying it, Tom? Or?
Well, it also no, I am buying that. So no, it does free up space and mind space, I guess, to do things that are perhaps a little bit more inspiring for designers. It also reminds me, though, of a thing that I heard Mike Funk talk about 2 weeks ago, when he looked at the different personas within design. And yes, there are those designers that get most satisfaction about doing deep research and doing empathetic surveys and more the creator part of it. Mm-hmm. On the other side, and I'm kind of interested what this table thinks about. There are also those designers that take more joy out of creating output and seeing stuff come to market and ship, actually. So
that's a really good point.
I saw your hand earlier, so
yeah, no, my name
Guido.
is Guido Mister. I work for Roche. I was the country manager for Canada. That's how I learned about Wrangle. I have no idea what sign-up is. I just like Nick and some people from Wrangle. That's why I'm always stay in contact. And today for me it's more like
we think it's
understand what you're really doing, because somebody is selling blood glucose meters for a living. I never got around it, and the more I hear now here, the more it looks to me it's like you're in a transformation by itself. If you ask what's the dark side, I think the dark side is, at least that's how I see it, the core function apparently, which is around design, is changing its product. And with that, people also have to change. So if you have a hardcore designer who wants to create buttons and clicks, and you no longer need that, but then he needs to move on and either accept that and move in that space which is now required and offered, like the mind space, or he needs to find a job where he can still do that. But this cannot be staying like that. And that's, I think, what every company has. And if you have this, I would call it back office function, whatever service function, they sometimes tend to be so convinced about the value they're creating that they forgot to speak the language of their internal customers. That's why I also like when you said you have to figure the hard facts, how much time do you save for the business to have somebody like me to invest in that, because if you don't convince me, I don't understand what you're doing, and probably it's the same in business if you talk to those guys, but then you have to turn it around, do you research how to convince those, and that's different terms. You have to speak differently to them to convince them. And the only reference I have, I led a transformation project within Roche a few years back, and that's the same thing. I was becoming a program manager overnight, never have done that before. And that was the same thing. We knew what we were doing, but the countries we were working with, they didn't know what we were doing. But then we had to start thinking, how would they perceive that change? And once we figured out how we communicate that, that helped us to sell our idea internally and get the funding. So that's what I would say from a more business perspective.
Can I actually follow up on this one, just to clarify? One part of a problem or a dark side sits with the designers being limited. The other problem is that we've been pushing the question, for instance, like of the importance of the design systems so long, and we finally reached that in front or in the eyes of business and engineers as well. That at the moment, the struggle I had in my couple of actually places already, that they would question, why do I need freedom still to develop, and why am I changing the design system that landed and that has a proven value and automation and performance is great right now? So that kind of struggle, not even on the designer side.
So they're questioning, why do I need designers anymore? Or
perceiving perfection, whereas...
Let's say it's very difficult then to win the liberty to make these changes and to actually prove something or like push something completely new.
Okay, so just evolving the system over time. It's like, oh, it's done now, it's launched.
It fights back.
It's never done. You're constantly evolving because you're always building. Digital is changing and you're always building new products. So...
I think it goes back. I mean, we're covering a lot of ground, but I do think it goes back to that design advocacy and the right spots or the top spots or whatever in an organization. If you don't have that understanding of the value of design in the right pockets, it's difficult. But I do think, to your point, what I've witnessed, certainly in Philips, but many organizations in consulting that I've talked to, is that of course the maturity of design is changing. Design is becoming more of a standard role. And I mean that in a positive way, but it's of course, designers now have to speak business, just to put it lightly. I mean, and that is a hard thing for some to accept. But as you go so much more into design inside of large organizations, that's what you have to do. And inside of Philips, we're dealing with that by creating new roles, do business acumen training. But you think, oh, that's just a level thing, as you become more senior. But oftentimes, we'll have one designer on a project off in some country by themselves, and they're fairly, 5 years experience. They have to understand business.
Yeah.
So that's really changing. It's sort of the professionalization of our craft, and it's just different.
Yeah.
I saw your hand. I just wanted to be aware of everybody's time.
Yeah.
And we're almost reaching the half
Okay.
hour, but please go ahead.
I think within our organization, we recently transformed everybody to product designers. And I think the key thing with our team is that we're more focused on, we're more problem solvers than designers, maybe. So then you don't want to like redesign a form. Like you're happy that that's in the design system. You're more like challenging the business part and making sure like the empathy part is within the product itself. And from there, like this design system support. And you have a couple of people who are like nerd out on the design system, like every rollover, every tiny little detail, and then the rest like uses that to like bring their product to life. But they don't want to think about like every aspect of the design. So maybe you only need a couple of craftsmen to say that word. And then the rest would be like more like problem solvers, I think.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fully agree. Yes.
I can.
No, I will give you the mic so we get it all. Oh,
But your question, yeah.
it's coming from left. and right.
So I really like the idea of measuring everything, and especially also like time spent on different projects. So as a designer, you're, or at least in my opinion, you're part of doing some for the design system, some for this project, some for this project. How do you measure? How do you? What kind of tools? What kind of things do you use, which is effective for designers to use?
In terms of tracking time,
Yeah. And also like doing something with that data to prove business that it's like analyzing your own team and and have them logging their time.
yeah.
or
So I mean,
how do you do that?
And surveys and, sorry. That's what you use? Or?
Yeah, am I allowed to talk about what the tools we actually use? Or,
Sure.
Yeah.
So Clarity has been a really good one, which is a
we
really
use Clarity.
yeah.
You use Clarity, really?
Not anymore, not at JP, but
You like Clarity?
hey, I mean, I like Excel,
All right,
so
yeah, okay.
I'm.
Yeah, I mean, tools are tools.
I'm not
yeah.
a design. I have a background in design, but I moved into the project management side, so I can recognise the benefits of using Excel to measure or to track all your data. So yeah, we use Clarity to track people's time, and then generally, honestly, Excel to really measure and analyse the data. Pivot tables are your friend.
Yeah, it becomes highly analytical. You can't get away from that. You just don't want to burden designers feeling like they're in some social experiment from the early 20th century, like with a stopwatch over their desk. But it really, really helps. Yeah. Because again, you're my prototypical businessman. I'm sorry, I'm just thinking as well as I am as well. But to speak the language of business, analytical information, data helps.
But how do you speak then back to the designer? What's the value? How do you show the value to the designer? So why should they log their time? I think
free time. I mean, not free, but creating space and creating more creativity. At least that's at Philips how we've worked with that to basically give them more structured time for other projects than their core.
Yeah, but sorry, are you asking how we convince designers that it's a good idea to actually track their time, and why am I doing it?
Yeah.
So for example, and yes, you're absolutely right. The design ops role is absolutely there to explain and demonstrate why you're doing all of this. And one of the ways that we've done that is a weekly or fortnightly update newsletter. So hey, you've given us loads of data. Thank you. May not call it data, but but yeah, thank you for sharing what you're doing, or whatever, and then actually share back with them what that means. So look, you guys have delivered X amount. You guys have worked across this many projects, this many areas of the business. We have had this great workshop that happened over here, and so we got this great bit of feedback over here, and actually bring it all into one place, and then systematically, and replaying it back. And then what you find is the designers go, oh my God, we've actually delivered shed loads here, and that so that's just one way you could do it in terms of, you know, the other approach is obviously one-on-one, but often it's, when you get to scale, it's actually we need to send in a Design Ops newsletter, and that might include who's joined the company, new starters, anything really, updates to Envision.
Use like Slack or Teams or something like that.
Whichever, yeah.
Yeah, we do the
Does
same.
that help?
So we have those communication channels as well, and just providing transparency to the design community on how they're spending their time and on what kind of activities. You can go super data and measure it by the second, or it can just be like one of our design studios says, hey, what are you guys working on this week? And everybody sends back, oh, this is the projects I'm on this week. And even that small level of transparency drives engagement and allows people to say, oh, I'm working on that project too, let's collaborate, let's get together. So sometimes it can be the smallest things that I think that kind of DNA, at least my experience, is more embedded in agencies than in in-house design teams, because people just kind of scatter when they get to work and they just work on their own stuff.
Celebration of the work.
Yeah, so you have to, my experience is, bring in a little more of that celebration and culture of the craft, even to saying what everyone is working on, and then go a step further to measure it. Yeah.
But you're right, celebrating your successes is a massive thing.
Yeah.
What have we delivered?
Question?
So I just want to say one. So Kim and Nathan are both going to be around for a little bit longer.
Sure.
And Paul, I would like to give you the chance to ask that one question that everybody needs to hear.
Oh, let's make it good.
And
there's still 4 questions. You had a question.
And invite everybody else to, you know, just approach.
Let me try, and then you can give me the survey feedback. So, forward-looking, 5 years from now, for each of you, on the topic of design ops, utopia, what's your vision? Where do you want to be for your company?
That's the last question.
Wow.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul.
You come to work, the screens design themselves, and you have 8 hours per day to do amazing other things.
Free time.
Not free, but yeah, I mean, we all are fearing AI, right? That like design work just happens with robots, but I think we all know that's not really how it's going to happen, that there's a higher level order of design. But I think, design ops is simply just enablement. So I don't think there's going to be sort of radical disruptive change in design. I think it's just maturing. And I think it just amazes me to see where it's come from. So I think that maturation is just going to continue to happen. And as all professionals in this industry, you're just going to see that designers are going to have an even more serious seat at the table and run companies, right? So if you can imagine a designer running a company, which is, Steve Jobs did it, but he's really the only one, right? Maybe there's some other examples I'm forgetting, but I think that is going to be more of what happens. So design ops in many ways, and I think at least the survey at the conference in New York was 50-50. 50% of the people doing design ops are designers, 50 are more of an operational or program management background. At least that was a survey at that conference. I think it becomes kind of the core of how creativity is enabled. That's not that radical, really. It's just an evolution, but that's what I would say.
Okay.
So what's your utopia?
In 5 years, I'd like us to be at the point where we're not asking what is design ops anymore. We know we're doing it, it's working, we're seeing the benefits. I also want to get to a point where we are consistent in our approach to designers feeling a part of the business and not just... I feel like we're still in this world where it still feels new, right? Even though we are embedded and we are in the budgets, and but there's still an element of, there are still conversations probably in every business, which is, well, why do I need a designer? We're still having those.
Yes.
Not so much, these days, but it's still there. So my utopia is that it's not even a question, and it's not even, and as I said, we're very close, but I like things to be perfect. So, I think we can definitely get further.
That's utopia.
So with that, Paul, I'm super grateful for that question.
Good question.
Because I think it wraps it up very, very nicely. And as I said, there is a lot of opportunity to continue the conversation and the dialogue afterwards. We definitely, from a Wrangle perspective, have the intention to continue the dialogue in that we're already thinking about perhaps doing a roundtable in the May timeframe or so as a means also to keep this community together. Finally, I would also direct you to the Wrangle Design Systems Hub, I believe it is called, where you find a large collection about content that has been produced by Wranglers that do see design systems as a product actually. So with that, I would like to thank you, and I would like to thank both of you, Ton, and as a small gesture of appreciation, we've got you some little gifts.
Wow,
Nathan,
thank
for
you.
you as well.
Thank you.
That's very kind.